The bark was so loud, so sudden, it echoed like a gunshot in the stunned silence. "Order! Order!" The judge's voice cracked as she slammed her gavel. From the defendant's table, Donovan Black threw his head back and laughed. "See? Told you, dumb animal!" But Officer Miller was frozen. His K-9 partner, Max, wasn't attacking. He wasn't scared. His front paws were planted firmly on the jury box railing, barking frantically at a man, juror number 7, who just stared back, utterly confused. What did this dumb animal see in a seemingly perfectly healthy man? And how would this one act of defiance seal the fate of the man who mocked him? Stay with us, because this story will leave you shocked. Before we continue this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing, true stories. And I'm always curious, what country are you watching from? Drop its name in the comments below. This story is one you will not forget. The air in Courtroom 3B was thick enough to cut with a knife, heavy with the smell of old wood, floor polish, and a tension so profound it felt like a physical weight. The only sound was the relentless tick-tock of the brass clock above the judge's bench. This was day 3 of the trial of the people versus Donovan Black. Every seat was filled. This wasn't just a trial. This was a town holding its breath. Officer Dan Miller stood by the side entrance, his hand resting on the harness of his partner. His partner wasn't a fellow officer. He was a 90-pound German shepherd named Max. And in this suffocating silence, Max was the only creature in the room who seemed perfectly calm. Miller hadn't always been a man of quiet patience. He'd spent 10 years on patrol, a man of sirens and split-second decisions. But one night changed everything. A pileup on the interstate. 7 cars, twisted metal everywhere. Miller was first on scene. Then he heard screaming from an SUV flipped completely over. A 6-year-old girl trapped in her car seat, hanging upside down, thrashing in full panic. Every time the firefighters approached with the hydraulic cutters, massive metal jaws that screamed like a chainsaw, she'd kick harder, scream louder, lost in absolute terror. Miller crawled through the window and stayed, not to extract her, just to be there. He talked soft and steady, about the stars through the broken windshield, about her mom waiting outside, about how sometimes when the world turns upside down, you just need someone to hold your hand. Slowly, her small hand reached out and grabbed his finger. When they finally cut her free, she wouldn't let go until her mother arrived. That night, Miller realized the deepest wounds aren't always physical. Sometimes the most important thing isn't chasing the bad guy. Sometimes it's just being present. He transferred to the K-9 Comfort Division the next week. The K-9 Comfort Unit didn't have many dogs. Most were washouts, too timid, too gentle, too emotional. But one file caught Miller's eye. Max, German Shepherd, 2 years of flawless training, obedience, scent work, discipline, until the final test. The command was simple: attack. Max sprinted, cornered the suspect perfectly, and then stopped. No bite, no growl. Instead, he licked the man's face. They tried again, same result. The trainers called him a failure, too soft for the force. 3 weeks later, Miller drove down to meet him. The trainer shrugged. He's better off as a pet. But when Miller opened the kennel gate, Max walked over calmly, sat down and looked up, not waiting for a command, but looking into him. And in that gaze, Miller saw something he hadn't seen since that night on the highway. That quiet instinct to stay with someone hurting, to simply be there. When Miller reached out, Max didn't sniff or lick. He just pressed his head into the officer's hand. Steady, trusting, present. It was the same gesture the little girl in the crashed SUV had made when she finally took Miller's hand. Right then, Miller understood. Max hadn't failed training. He had refused to harm. And that made him perfect for a different kind of service, one that healed instead of fought. Want to be a different kind of hero? Miller whispered. Max wagged his tail once, twice. From across the future courtroom, the man they'd one day face, Donovan Black, would smirk and call him a dumb animal. But Miller already knew the truth. This dog saw what others couldn't. And soon, the world would too. The case against Donovan Black was brutal in its simplicity. The prosecution had no physical evidence, no DNA, no witnesses except one. Everything hinged on a single 8-year-old girl being able to point at her abductor and say, "That's him." And right now, that little girl was somewhere down the hall, too terrified to even walk into the courtroom. This is why Max was here. Not as a showpiece, not as a distraction, but because Sarah Jenkins needed someone who could absorb her fear and give her the courage to speak. Miller had seen it dozens of times. Children who'd been through hell, who couldn't talk to therapists or detectives or their own parents, but somehow they could whisper their truth to a dog with patient brown eyes and a steady heartbeat. Sarah was their entire case. Without her testimony, Donovan Black would walk free. The bailiff's voice still hung in the air. The prosecution calls Sarah Jenkins to the stand. And then the door opened. A small girl appeared in the doorway. She wore a pink dress that seemed painfully bright against the drab courtroom walls. She was holding her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. And she was trembling. Not just nervous trembling. Her entire body was shaking so violently you could see the dress quiver with each breath. Her mother squeezed her hand one last time, whispered something in her ear, and took a seat in the front row. Sarah was alone now. She had to walk the rest of the way by herself. It looked like the longest walk in the world. Each step toward that massive wooden witness stand seemed to take forever. The room was completely silent except for the soft sound of her shoes on the carpet. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. The jury, the lawyers, the judge, the gallery packed with spectators, and Donovan Black. Sarah climbed into the witness chair. It was built for adults, and it seemed to swallow her whole. Her feet dangled inches above the floor. Her hands gripped the armrests so hard her fingers went pale. Prosecutor Allen approached slowly, her face kind but professional. She'd done this before. She knew how fragile this moment was. "Sarah," she said softly, "can you please state your name for the court?" Sarah looked up. Her eyes, wide and terrified, scanned the room, past the prosecutor, past the jury, past her mother sitting in the front row with tears already streaming down her face. And then Sarah's eyes locked onto Donovan Black. Black didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at her with those flat, dead eyes, a predator recognizing prey, and on his lips, the ghost of a smile. Sarah froze. The color drained from her face like someone had opened a valve. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a small, strangled gasp. She shook her head, tears welling up instantly, spilling over. Her breathing became fast and shallow, hyperventilating. She was spiraling into a full-blown panic attack right there in front of everyone. "Sarah?" Prosecutor Allen tried again, her voice gentle. "Sarah, can you hear me?" But the girl was gone. lost somewhere inside her own terror. Allen turned to the bench. Your Honor, permission to allow K9 Max to approach the witness, as previously discussed and approved. Black's lawyer, Cole, shot to his feet like he'd been spring-loaded. Objection, Your Honor. This is a circus. That animal will prejudice the jury against my client. Judge Harrison, a stern woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, brought her gavel down once. Sharp. Final. Overruled, Mr. Cole. The child is in distress. The dog is a recognized therapeutic tool of this court and has been pre-approved. She looked toward the side entrance. Officer Miller, please proceed. This was the moment. This was why they were here. Miller looked down at Max, who was already focused, already reading the room. Go see, Miller said quietly, releasing the harness. Max stood. His tags jingled softly as he moved. He didn't rush, didn't bound forward like a pet excited to greet someone. His movements were deliberate, calm, professional. He walked across the courtroom floor, his paws barely making a sound on the carpet. Every person in that room watched him. The jury leaned forward. The stenographer's hands stilled on her machine. Even the bailiffs, who'd seen everything, watched. Max approached the witness stand. He looked up at Sarah, who was still covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. He sat down beside the chair, and then, with a small, practiced groan, the kind of sound that says, I'm settling in for a while, he rested his heavy head directly on her knee. Sarah flinched at first, gasped, her hands flew up defensively, but then she looked down, and she saw him. Brown eyes, calm, patient, completely steady in a world that had tilted sideways. Slowly, instinctively, her small, trembling hand uncurled. It moved toward him almost on its own. Her fingers found the soft fur between his ears. She touched him once, twice. Then her other hand joined in, grabbing onto his harness like it was a lifeline. Max didn't move, didn't pull away. He just stayed there, his weight solid and real against her leg, his breathing slow and even. And something remarkable happened. Sarah's breathing, which had been ragged and desperate, began to slow. 1 breath, 2, 3, each one a little steadier than the last, matching the rhythm of the dog beside her. Her shoulders stopped shaking, the tears still fell, but quietly now. Not panic, just release. Max let out a soft sigh, a sound that seemed to say, I'm right here, you're okay. I'm not going anywhere. Across the room, Miller felt his throat tighten. 5 years of doing this, and it still got him every time. This was Max's superpower. Not aggression, not intimidation, just presence. Just being exactly what someone needed in their worst moment. It was then that Donovan Black leaned toward his lawyer. And this time, he didn't bother to whisper. Look at that, Black said, his voice dripping with contempt, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. Pathetic. They need a stupid dog to do their job for them. He turned his head, looked directly at Officer Miller standing by the wall and smirked. It's just a dumb animal, officer. You know that, right? Miller's eyes met Black's across the room. For a long moment, neither man looked away. Miller's jaw tightened. His hand, which had been relaxed at his side, slowly curled into a fist, but he didn't respond, didn't take the bait. He simply gave Black a single, slow nod. Not agreement, acknowledgement. I see you. I know what you are. Then Miller deliberately, pointedly, turned his attention back to his partner. Back to what actually mattered. Prosecutor Allen stepped forward again, her voice soft but steady now. "Sarah," she said gently, "with your friend Max beside you, can you tell us what you saw on the night of October 12th? Sarah kept her hand on Max's head, her fingers buried in his fur like she was holding on to the only solid thing in a spinning world. She took a deep breath. Her small shoulders squared up just a little. And then, in a voice that was quiet but clear, she began to speak. "I was playing in the front yard, with my chalk, drawing flowers on the driveway." For the next 20 minutes, the courtroom was absolutely spellbound. Sarah, anchored by the warm, breathing presence beside her, recounted that terrible day. She described the dark van that pulled up to the curb. She described the man who got out, how he asked if she'd seen his lost puppy, how he said the puppy was just around the corner. Would she help him look? Her voice was thin as paper, but it didn't break. Every time it started to waver, Max would shift slightly, press his head a little firmer against her leg, and she'd steady. She told them how the man grabbed her when she got close to the van, how he tried to push her inside, how she screamed and kicked and bit his hand, how her mother came running from the house, and the man let go and sped away. Prosecutor Allen listened, letting Sarah tell it in her own words, at her own pace. When the girl finally paused, Allen asked the question that would decide everything. "Sarah," she said gently, "is that man here in the courtroom today? The man who tried to take you?" Sarah's hand stopped moving on Max's fur. The dog, sensing the spike of fear like a physical thing, nudged his head up and licked the salt from her palm. A small gesture, an enormous comfort. Sarah took a shaky breath. She raised her small, trembling finger and pointed, directly, unequivocally, across the room at Donovan Black. "He's right there." The courtroom seemed to inhale as one, a collective gasp. Black didn't react. He just sat there, that cold reptilian smile returning to his face like he was watching something amusing on television. "Thank you, Sarah," Allen said softly. "No further questions, Your Honor." Now it was the defense's turn. Cole stood up slowly, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. The kindly expression he sometimes wore for the jury was gone. Now his face was all sharp angles and cold calculation, a shark smelling blood in the water. He approached the witness stand, his steps deliberate and measured. "You're 8 years old, aren't you, Sarah?" he began, his voice deceptively gentle. "Yes. You like dogs, I see. That's a very nice dog you have there." He gestured dismissively at Max. "Does he help you remember things? Or does he just help you say what the prosecutor wants you to say?" "Objection." Allen was on her feet. "Sustained," Judge Harrison said sharply. "Get to your point, Mr. Cole. And watch your tone." Cole smiled, thin, humorless. "Of course, Your Honor. My point is simply this." He turned back to Sarah. "It was dark that night, wasn't it? It was afternoon, but getting dark. And you were scared, weren't you? Terrified. When you're that scared, it's easy to get confused about what you saw. I wasn't confused." "No?" Cole pounced. "Because when you gave your first statement to Officer Marconi on October 13th, you said the van was blue. Do you remember that?" Sarah hesitated. It looked blue. But it was dark, and—" "So it looked blue," Cole interrupted. "But today you're telling this jury it was black." "My client's van is black. Isn't that convenient?" His voice started to rise. "So, which is it, Sarah? Blue? Black? Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" "I'm not lying." "Really?" Cole wheeled around, gesturing dramatically. "Blue, black. Maybe it was green. Maybe it was a truck. Maybe you didn't see anything at all, and your mother told you what to say. Objection! He's badgering the witness. I'll rephrase, Cole shouted back at Alan, then turned on Sarah again, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Isn't it true that you're only saying these things because your mother told you to? Because everyone feels sorry for you? Because you get to be the center of attention with your special dog? This was the attack, the moment Cole had been building toward. Sarah's face crumpled. She started to cry, not just tears, but deep, racking sobs that shook her entire frame. She recoiled in the chair, pulling her knees up, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. No, that's not. I saw him. I saw his face. You saw nothing, Cole roared, pointing his finger at her like a weapon. You saw shadows. You saw nightmares. You're making this up because that's what everyone wants you to say. You're lying. I'm not lying, Sarah shrieked, her voice shattering into 1,000 pieces. She was completely lost in the terror now. Her hands clenched white on the armrests. Her breath came in tiny, useless gasps. She was drowning in front of everyone, and there was nothing anyone could do. Or so they thought. Max whined softly. He pushed his head harder against Sarah's leg, nudging his nose insistently under her hand, trying to get her to pet him, to reconnect. This was his training. This was the comfort he was built to provide. Officer Miller tensed by the wall. This was the critical moment. He willed the judge to intervene, to shut Cole down before he destroyed this child completely. Miller's job was to support, to stay back. But he was seconds away from stepping in himself, protocol be damned. And then something changed. Max, who had been laser-focused on Sarah, a living shield against her trauma, suddenly lifted his head. His entire body went rigid. The soft, gentle comfort dog demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by something else. Something primal. Something professional. Miller frowned. He knew every twitch, every ear flick, every subtle shift in weight of this dog. This wasn't comfort behavior. This was work. But there was no work to be done here. No narcotics to find. No bomb to detect. Max's head snapped to the side. He wasn't looking at Sarah anymore. Wasn't looking at the screaming lawyer. Wasn't looking at Donovan Black's hateful stare. His eyes were fixed, with laser-like intensity, on the jury box. What is it, boy? Miller thought, his pulse quickening. Focus on the girl. Sarah needs you. But Max's ears pinned back, his nostrils flared, pulling in deep, diagnostic sniffs. Sniff. 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 He wasn't just smelling. He was tasting the air, analyzing it, processing a scent that no one else in the room knew existed. Max, Miller whispered urgently. Down. See the girl. Max ignored him. Miller's blood ran cold. Max never ignored a command. Not in 5 years. Oh God, what's happening? Miller's mind raced. Is he sick? Is he panicking from the yelling? Don't do this. Don't prove that monster right. Don't just be a... The dog's gaze locked onto one person. Juror number 7. A man in his late 50s, graying hair, wearing a simple blue polo shirt. Completely unremarkable. Martin Pacey. He was listening intently to the cross-examination, his brow furrowed in obvious sympathy for the crying child. He even glanced at Max, a look of mild confusion crossing his face at the dog's sudden shift, before turning his attention back to the lawyer. By all appearances, he was perfectly, completely fine. Then Max let out a low, vibrating whine, a sound that started deep in his chest, a sound that Miller felt more than heard. It was a sound Miller had heard only twice before in his entire career. Once when a diabetic cop's blood sugar crashed moments before he seized. Once during a nursing home visit, seconds before an elderly man collapsed from a massive, silent stroke. It was the alert sound. "Mr. Cole, that is enough." Judge Harrison's voice finally boomed, cutting through the lawyer's tirade. She'd seen Sarah's complete breakdown. "We will take a 15-minute recess. The witness will be—" Her eyes fell on Max. The dog was trembling now, body coiled like a spring, still whining, still staring at juror number 7. And Officer Miller. "Control your animal," the judge snapped, mistaking the alert for agitation. "His behavior is disruptive." Miller stood up, his mind a warring chaos of duty and instinct. "Max, heel," he commanded, voice sharp, ready to physically pull his partner out. But it was too late. The bark was so loud, so sudden and unexpected, it echoed like a gunshot in the stunned silence of the room. Sarah shrieked in surprise, burying her face in her hands. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order! Order! Officer Miller, get that dog out of here now!" Donovan Black threw his head back and laughed. A real, barking, ugly laugh. "See? Told you, dumb animal. Can't even handle a little yelling?" What a joke. But Miller was frozen. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking at Max. The dog wasn't being aggressive, wasn't scared. He was warning. His body was coiled, eyes still locked on Juror 7, pleading. "Max, heel!" Miller commanded again. Max barked. Not at Miller, not at Sarah. He barked at the juror. Then he did the one thing he was trained explicitly, never ever to do. He left the witness. In a blur of dark fur, Max jumped from the witness platform, landed silently on the carpet, and in 3 powerful bounds, he was at the jury box. The courtroom exploded into pure pandemonium. "Oh my God," a juror screamed, falling backward in her chair. People in the gallery surged toward the exits, shoving and yelling. The stenographer knocked over her machine with a crash. The 2 bailiffs nearest the jury box, seeing a 90-pound German shepherd lunging toward the jurors, reacted on pure instinct. Their hands flew to their holsters. Miller heard the sickening click-click as they unclipped their sidearms. "No!" Miller roared, his voice cracking with an authority he didn't know he possessed. "Stand down! Don't shoot! He's alerting! He is alerting!" His words hung in the air just long enough. Max didn't jump on the juror. He planted his front paws firmly on the low wooden barrier of the jury box, putting his face just inches from Martin Pacey. He barked again, frantic, insistent, desperate. Martin looked stunned. His face was pale, beaded with sudden sweat. "What? What's wrong with him?" he asked, looking around, eyes wide with confusion, not fear. "I'm fine. Sir?" the bailiff next to him asked, hand still gripping his weapon, now aimed at the floor. Martin's face was a mask of confusion. He raised his hand as if to wave the dog away, but the hand stopped midair, clumsy, awkward. It went to his chest, clutching the blue polo shirt. I don't feel..." And then his eyes rolled back in his head. He slumped sideways in his chair, collapsing onto the terrified juror next to him. Utterly silent. Unconscious. "Medic!" Judge Harrison screamed, her voice raw with panic. "Bailiff, get a medic! Clear the courtroom now!" Chaos erupted. People scrambled for the doors. Through it all, Max did not stop barking. He was telling them, "Don't stop. Don't look away. Help him, now!" 2 bailiffs vaulted over the jury box railing. "He's not breathing," one shouted, pulling Martin's heavy body onto the floor in the cramped space. "I've got no pulse." Miller finally reached Max, grabbed his harness. Good boy, Max. Good boy. I see him. The second Miller's hand touched him, Max went instantly silent, but his entire body was thrumming with adrenaline, eyes still fixed on the fallen juror. The courtroom was being cleared. Sarah was rushed out by her mother, her own terror forgotten in this new drama. The only people left were the judge, court staff, and Donovan Black. Standing at his table with his mouth open, the mocking smile completely gone, replaced by pure, slack-jawed disbelief. The bailiff EMT ripped Martin's shirt open. "Starting compressions!" he yelled. Another officer ran in with the red AED box from the wall. "Get the pads on him! Stop compressions!" The machine's electronic voice filled the room, analyzing rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." A long second of terrible silence. Shock advised. "Clear!" the EMT yelled. Martin's body jumped, a grotesque twitch. Then stillness. The EMT put 2 fingers to Martin's neck. Nothing. Still V-fib. Resume compressions. The bailiff, a big man, was sweating now, pumping hard. The sound of ribs cracking, a dry, terrible pop, filled the room. But he didn't stop. "Come on, Marty," Judge Harrison whispered from her bench, hands clasped to her mouth. Tears streaming down her face. She knew this man, Martin Pacey, a good man, a father, a grandfather. Stop compressions. The AED was ready again. Shock advised. Clear. Another jolt. Another agonizing wait. Still nothing. Again. Keep pumping. The room was thick with the smell of ozone and desperation. Miller stood by, holding Max, who was whining low in his throat, a sound of unbearable tension. One more time. The EMT was getting tired. Clear. A third shock. The room held its breath. The machine whirred, analyzing. And then a new sound. Steady, strong. Beep, beep, beep. "I've got a rhythm," the EMT shouted, his voice cracking with relief. "Sinus rhythm." Faint, but it's there. "He's back. He's back." Paramedics burst through the doors like a wave of professional calm, taking over, loading Martin onto a gurney. As they wheeled him out, the lead paramedic looked at Judge Harrison, then at Miller and Max. "Who saw it?" he asked, his voice sharp and serious. "There are no warning signs for this kind of attack." A silent MI. If he'd been alone. If he hadn't gotten CPR in that exact second. He shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. 30 more seconds, he'd be gone. Whoever called it saved his life. The judge, her face pale, slowly sat down. She looked over the bench, past the overturned chairs and discarded AED pads, at Officer Miller and his German shepherd. Max was now sitting calmly, leaning against Miller's leg, panting lightly, as if he'd just finished a routine training exercise. "Officer," Judge Harrison said, her voice trembling, stripped of its usual authority. "You're K9. How in God's name did he know?" Miller stroked Max's head, his own hands shaking. "Your Honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We train them for seizures, for diabetic crashes. They can smell the chemical changes in the body. Ketones, volatile organic compounds, things we can't see. Things that happen before the body itself fails." He paused. "I've seen him do this once before. A diabetic veteran at the VA hospital." Max started barking just like this, 5 minutes before the man's glucose meter even registered the crash. He smells the chemical signature of death approaching, and he was trying to stop it. Miller looked down at Max, his voice breaking slightly. "He wasn't attacking, Your Honor. He was saving." The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Everyone was still processing what they'd just witnessed. The impossible thing. The miracle. Donovan Black was quietly led out by a bailiff, his hands cuffed behind his back. His trial was now an afterthought, a mistrial that would have to be rescheduled. But as he shuffled past Officer Miller and Max, his eyes never left the dog. The arrogance was gone. The mocking smile had vanished. What replaced it was something Miller had never seen in Black's face before. Something that looked, for the first time, like genuine fear. Not fear of the law, not fear of prison or the judge or the testimony that would put him away. Fear of something he couldn't understand. Fear of the unexplainable. Fear of a dog who saw death coming before any human could, and barked loud enough to stop it. Black said nothing as they led him away, but Miller saw it in his eyes. The man who had called Max a dumb animal now understood he'd been in the presence of something far more intelligent than himself. By that evening, the story had exploded beyond the small-town courthouse. It wasn't just local news anymore. It was national, international. Satellite trucks from CNN, Fox News, and Good Morning America lined the streets by dawn. The cell phone footage was grainy and chaotic. Someone in the gallery had recorded the moment Max leapt toward the jury box, but it was everywhere, on every news channel, on every social media platform. Millions of views in the first 12 hours, and in every single story, they played the audio. Donovan Black's voice, dripping with contempt, spoken just minutes before the miracle. "It's just a dumb animal." That one line, contrasted with the image of Max with his paws on the jury box railing, barking frantically to save a man's life, became a global symbol overnight. It was a story of pure instinct versus cold arrogance, of compassion versus cruelty, of life over cynicism. The hashtag started trending worldwide. Dumb animal was flooded with people mocking Black's words. Hero Dog exploded with photos of Max, artwork, tributes. The police station was flooded with calls. The courthouse received thousands of letters. Donations poured into the county's K-9 comfort program, enough money to fund it for the next decade. Max, the dog who had failed his aggression test 5 years ago, the dog who was deemed too gentle to be a real police dog, became overnight the most famous and beloved hero in the state. But the most important story, the one that had started all of this, still needed to finish. 2 weeks later, the retrial for Donovan Black began. New jury, same courtroom. But everything was different now. The gallery was packed, standing room only, and half the people were there just to catch a glimpse of Max. When the bailiff called Sarah Jenkins to the stand, she walked in with her head held high, not holding her mother's hand this time, walking beside Officer Miller with Max at her side. The little girl who had been too terrified to speak now entered like she had the most powerful guardian in the world. Because she did. When Sarah climbed into that oversized witness chair and Max rested his head on her knee, she looked across the courtroom directly at Donovan Black. And there was no fear in her eyes anymore, only resolve, only strength. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and unwavering. This time, there was no brutal cross-examination. Cole, faced with her unshakable testimony, and a jury that was looking at Max not as a prop, but as a proven life-saving hero, knew he was beaten. After a brief recess, he advised his client to accept a plea deal. Donovan Black was found guilty on all counts. 30 years, no parole. Justice had been served, a justice made possible not by legal brilliance or forensic evidence, but by the dumb animal who wasn't supposed to be there. But the story doesn't end in that courtroom. 1 month later, after 2 surgeries and a new pacemaker, Officer Miller and Max walked into a bright hospital room. Martin Pacey, the former juror number 7, was sitting up in a chair by the window, looking pale but smiling. The moment they entered, Martin's wife rushed over. She didn't say anything at first. She just wrapped her arms around Officer Miller in a tight embrace, crying softly into his uniform. "You saved my husband," she whispered. Miller gently patted her back. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "I didn't." He did. He nodded toward Max, who had already trotted over to Martin's chair. "Well, there he is," Martin said, his voice weak but warm. "The noisiest doctor I've ever had." Miller smiled and let Max off his leash. The dog immediately pushed his head under Martin's hand. 2 of Martin's grandchildren, who'd been sitting quietly on the floor coloring, erupted in giggles and rushed over to pet the famous dog. Max's tail wagged happily, soaking in the affection. "The doctors told me everything," Martin said, his eyes welling with tears as he stroked Max's fur. "They said I was gone. No pulse. A widowmaker heart attack. Silent. No warning signs. They said whatever that dog smells, whatever chemical signature he detected, it gave me the only chance I had." He was my alarm bell. His voice broke. He was my miracle. He looked at Miller, gratitude etched deep in his face. "How do you thank someone, something, that saved your life when they didn't even know you?" Miller sat down, watching his partner with pride. Max had laid his head contentedly on Martin's lap, eyes half closed, completely at peace. "That's the thing, Martin," Miller said softly. "You're right. He didn't know you. He wasn't biased. He wasn't scared of the lawyers yelling. He wasn't intimidated by the defendant. He wasn't fooled by a suit or a sneer." Miller looked at Max, thinking back to that day 5 years ago at the training facility. When he was a puppy, they said he failed. Too gentle, not aggressive enough to attack. Miller smiled. They were wrong. He is aggressive. He's a warrior. He just hunts a different kind of enemy. In that courtroom, everyone was focused on the monster they could see. He was focused on the one they couldn't. He used the same drive, the same instinct, the same determination, not to hurt, but to heal. Miller's voice was quiet but firm. He wasn't a dumb animal. He was the smartest, bravest soul in that room. The story of Officer Miller and Max reminds us that sometimes courage isn't aggression. It's a bark of warning, a stubborn refusal to be silent. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones walking quietly beside us, the ones we underestimate, the ones we dismiss. And sometimes the one you call a dumb animal is the only one smart enough and brave enough to save your life.